So I'm Grant Powell. I'm not from San Francisco. So I walked here from BART, and it turns out there's a Grant and a Powell Street on the way here, which I was pretty excited about. I was going to find where they intersect and take a picture. It turns out they don't intersect, so that kind of ruined that dream for me. Thanks for coming to my talk. I'm super excited to be here. All the other Beam talks have really got me excited about the ecosystem and what everyone's doing. I want to start today just talking about why software development is exciting for me. I never thought I would be doing this, and then after a couple moments in my life that I can point to very specifically, I realized that this is exactly what I want to be doing. Did anyone not study computer science in here? I also didn't study computer science. I studied factory science, so my big things were I love factories. And I learned all about them and the mathematics behind them. And a lot of factories are driven by people and people processes and constantly changing. So the image of these KUKA robots assembling cars isn't really what reality is like. It's a lot of people and processes. So in college, I joined all these factory science groups, and they were doing science for factories. They were writing code for them. So that's when I learned Python. Here's a picture of me presenting some results. And I never thought I would do coding for a living until one day. I was on the executive board of my fraternity, and we had about 150 brothers. And I was rush chair, so I had 1 week of responsibility, whereas everyone else was working all the time. And the social chair comes up to me and says, Grant, I love this part of my job. I love doing socials and day parties, but I really hate keeping attendance. And I totally got it. Part of his job was to go to every event we have with a piece of notebook paper, and people would have to write their names on it. It always got lost or covered in beer, and Zach would take it at the end of the night back to his apartment and type it in on his Excel spreadsheet, and then get him from all the other events that he wasn't able to go at. And at the end of the week, he would send out an email to the brothers this is where you stand for the semester, and immediately he'd get 10 emails back saying, no, you're wrong. This is not where I stand. I was actually at this event or whatever. So that was the first moment that kind of drove me to software development. Is I sat down with him and we talked about what do people need, what is the user flow, what does the exec board want, what do the users want, and I'd never done web development, but I Googled it in Python, and I ended up building our fraternity's attendance manager. And this was the first moment where I really started to see the magic of building software for human beings. Once I describe it, you sign in on the exec team and you make an event, and then it generates a QR code, and the brothers would take a picture on Snapchat because iPhones didn't have QR readers at the time, and it would keep track. And right away, they could see all their credits, and they could, the exec team could see exactly who was at their events. We could download a spreadsheet at the end. And the real magic for me was as soon as the beginning of chapter meeting, when we traditionally did roll call, which took 15 minutes of trying to get 150 people to be quiet so we could call their names in 30 seconds. So I've always been really, really passionate about building things for people. And that's why Elixir is so exciting for me, because as soon as I went from Ruby to Python to Ruby to Elixir, and Elixir has given me the power to build amazing things for people. So before I go any further, can I ask you guys some questions? Who here primarily works in Erlang? Okay, that's cool. Anyone primarily work in Elixir? Okay, that's good. Who here mostly writes web apps that human beings interact with through a web browser? That's cool. Who here's customers are other companies like SaaS software? Cool. Yeah. So this will resonate, hopefully. So I've given this talk before. It's almost the exact same slides, but it was the exact opposite audience. I was asked a couple weeks ago to talk to a bunch of Rails developers and get them excited about Elixir. And now I get to come here and talk to people that are excited about Elixir and tell them why Rails developers are also excited about it. So going back to, I just found out in my fraternity that I was building all these web apps, and I really liked building things for people. So I had my next big stroke of luck. I was dead set on going to a huge Fortune 100 company. Until one day, the president of the fraternity was like, Grant, will you come to this leadership event with me in Atlanta? And I didn't want to go, but I eventually went with him. And I get down there, and it was a fantastic event, but the keynote speaker was a local businessman. And he comes up and he talks about the lives of salespeople and how hard it is to do sales in the modern world, and how they saw this problem and they were building software, and how exciting it was for him to hear people say this product that has never existed before, now it exists and it makes my day so much better. People were starting their day in this product, people were ending their day in this product, and it was making their lives a lot easier. So that really resonated with me. I went up and talked to him. He invited me down to meet the team. I met Steve Bussey, who wasn't able to come today. He was on the speaker list but had unexpected things at the last moment, and He's one of the most intelligent people I've ever met, but the thing I respect the most about him is like his devotion to building things for people and like how much he cares about the people using it. So I joined the team. It was tiny at the time. The left is the product team about 3 months in. The right is the picture that I sent my mom on my first day. She was not thrilled that I turned down a bunch of big companies to go work at a little startup in Atlanta. She's usually right. I think she was wrong about this one. This is what I look at most of the day. This is the product. I'll go into a little bit of why our needs are really well suited for Rails, but now we're kind of migrating to Elixir and what that means for us. So yeah, I get to look at this a lot. So anyway, I joined the company about 3 years ago. I'm the 70th employee. Steve was the 6th employee. We're at about 500 now, and it's been growing over 100% every year since then. And it's been a blast. If you ever get the chance to work at a company that's growing at that rate, I highly recommend it. You can kind of see my desk if you squint on the 24th floor there. This is Atlanta if you've never been. So now I get the very exciting job at an Elixir conference to get you hyped about Rails and kind of explain to you why teams are choosing Rails and what are the things that they're getting before we kind of talk into why Elixir is a really good fit for that need and why we moved to it. So to get in the mind of like the Rails mindset, one of my big things is like different tools for different projects, and like choosing technology is really dependent on lots and lots of factors even outside of the engineering org. Like there's business needs and there's all sorts of ecosystem things. So these are the really big, amazing things that you get from running a Rails app. Developer productivity is huge. You can take pretty much any engineer from any code base and they can learn Ruby very quickly. They can come into it. The more advanced Ruby people can build constructs for other people. You get this a lot in Elixir with macros. Lizzie's talking on that after this. But that's also something we felt in Rails. We were able to write these constructs to be more productive. The next thing you get is a mature SaaS community. So like as your company starts to level up, every time you get to the new level, there's someone that's been there before. And they're like, you ready for Kafka? Zendesk has already done this. And here are all the guides, and here is the library. Just plug it in and go. And that's incredibly valuable for us. And then excellent tooling. So this is one thing that I'm very excited about as I'm coming here and seeing all this tooling getting built, is it's not just the language itself, it's the ecosystem. So like one thing that we found invaluable as we scaled is New Relic. And New Relic was able to build this incredible Rails monitoring tool that's just drop in because of the community and how many people were using it. So those are the three things that we got, and we were able to be very, very successful with those things. So we started scaling, and we just started to feel a lot of pain around some points. A lot of our workload is waiting on things. I'll get into more of that. If you're familiar with Elixir, which I think you probably are, or Erlang, since you're here, you'll see why Elixir's pretty good at that. And Ruby only really has one option for not doing things in thread, and it's throwing it in a scikit queue, which is great for some applications, but doesn't really meet all the concurrency needs of a modern app. So talking about I/O wait, one of our big value adds is as your reps do things in our sales orchestration platform, we'll process things in the background for them. We'll send emails for them. We'll log it to Salesforce. So what that looks like for us is like we'll have some business logic. It loads the fact that it needs to do something in a Rails process or thread, and then it will call out to Salesforce and it will wait. And then eventually Salesforce will come back to us. But that entire slice of time, we had an entire Ruby interpreter and OS process just sitting there on our hardware not doing anything. So that got expensive pretty quick, and we started to hit a lot of like, this is not great. Another thing that we do pretty commonly is one of our features is we want to provide you with data as you're selling. Can I get a company name? Has anyone got any good names? I'm going to call on someone if no one volunteers. Brex, awesome. So if I'm trying to sell to Brex, I'd have that account in my Salesloft instance. One of the things that we're going to provide you with is data around Brex and like all their funding events, articles, their top competitors. So that makes it really effective as you're selling this product across domains. You can keep all those, right? So how that works is you call out to Salesloft and we'll be like, I'd like to know about Brex. And we have to call out to our third-party data providers and then eventually proxy that back to you. So it's not really cacheable because almost every request is unique and it gets stale very fast. And as we kind of move into why Ruby isn't great at concurrency, start to think about what happens when Aller starts getting slow or goes down, because we've dealt with that. Another thing we do is like sharing is caring. There are some things you can't throw money at, and those are the hardest things. For us, it was database connections for a long time. We ended up switching to PG Bouncer, which is its own project. his own project, but a lot of things in the Rails community are like, okay, I'm going to start by getting all the things I could possibly need, like a database connection, and then I'll do a little work, and then I'll call out to Salesforce, and I'll just wait, and all that time I'm holding a database connection. And if you're familiar with Postgres, database connections can be very expensive, and a limited resource that's not very good at scaling. So like really fundamentally is that web servers, especially how we're using them, are a concurrency problem. Is lots of people are calling into our groups of Rails servers, and then we're calling out to lots of different things, and we're constructing responses, and things are coming back, and then we eventually give the stuff back to the users. So I'm going to focus a little bit on this part of it. Has anyone worked in a kind of a Django or Rails situation before? Yeah. So you'll be familiar with this. Before I go any further, is everyone familiar with these two terms, OS process and OS thread? We don't use them in Erlang. We have schedulers and nodes, but these are very common concurrency primitives in Ruby. So in order to give your web app concurrency, so more than one person can use it at a time, you got to use Rails app servers. There's two big ones in the space. There's Unicorn, which is a process-based architecture. So they'll fork off your entire Rails process. Every process gets its own copy of the Rails interpreter. Every process gets its own database connections, whatever. And you can serve one request at a time with each process. So that's very expensive very quickly in terms of resources. The other one is Puma, which is one big process and then 16 Rails threads. Ruby has a global interpreter lock, so only one of those threads can be operating at a time. We typically don't hit that so much because a lot of our threads are just waiting on stuff. But it does limit the amount of horizontal scalability you can get because you can only have so many threads and then hit the kill. And the other thing to think about when you're doing this is you have to make sure your app is thread safe, which for a long time, a lot of Ruby wasn't. So we ran into that when we were first migrating over to Puma. So anyway, we didn't really enthusiastically come to Elixir. We were kind of dragged kicking and screaming by like what we wanted to build for our customers. As we were kind of building out a sales platform, we realized that like a big part of like a sales execution engine is the dialer. Like companies that are managing these sales teams have needs of a dialer that aren't really met at all by any of the existing products. So we kind of figured out what this was. We were the first in the space to be doing this. This is our dialer. It lives in a Chrome extension, and it's on the page. You can click to dial, and it will do all this stuff and log to Salesforce. And a sales dialer is different than like a regular home dialer in a lot of ways. We have one-sided call recording, so we can record just you or record both sides, depending on the state laws. We can voicemail drop. Your numbers stay with your company, so you don't have to expose your personal number, and if you leave the company still has it. All sorts of fun stuff like that. And at the team level, as a team manager, I want to be able to look at all the calls. I want to be able to jump into any call at any point. I want to be able to say something to the rep on the call that the person can't hear or say something to the person while it's going. And we figured all this out, and we built it, and it was amazing. Elixir was a huge part of this. If you look at the Twilio APIs that they provided at the time, you'd be like, there's no way you could build any of this. It turns out you can. But our competitors couldn't figure it out for a long time. So around this time, I got hired, and I got put directly onto an Elixir team. My first project was on live website tracking. So after we decided that dialer was a big part of the sales process, so is your marketing site. So like whatever .com you are. So what we decided is that like whenever someone's on your site, we want to tell you right now. And we want to tell you what pages they're going to and when, and let you action on it. Because like a big part of our value add is as soon as something happens, you action. And in sales, that extra second, like as soon as they open your email, you call, or as soon as you go to the website, you email is a huge advantage. So how this works in practice is you put the third-party script on your page, and then it pings us. And like we'll just keep a track of that. We do some tracking cookies through links, and we can tell you when things are happening. But the big thing here is we built it in Elixir, and then it got really popular. So we were used to running about 5 to 6 figures of requests in our Rails servers for everything. And then within a couple weeks, we went from 0 to like 1 million requests a minute on this Elixir server, and we'd never dealt with anything like that. And thank gosh, it worked. Like the Elixir app was just chugging along, doing this 1 million requests a minute on less hardware than our team's laptops. And like that was really like, wow, Elixir can do these incredible things that we just couldn't do in Rails before. So we started looking at our needs, and we came up with like these 3 things are the things we really want in the technologies that we're investing in. We want developer productivity. We want to be able to ramp people up fast and write beautiful code. We want to be able to wait on things efficiently because like a lot of what we do is waiting. and we want to have good performance and scalability. And I think it's important to note, like for us, performance doesn't really mean going as fast as possible, because a lot of times like the bottleneck is Salesforce, and we can't make your Salesforce faster. What it means is being able to efficiently, per unit hardware, handle more requests. So I gave this talk to a bunch of Ruby developers 2 weeks ago, and I was not expecting the response that I got from the next slide. I was very excited about it. So the next slide is some code that I wrote. It is a Phoenix controller, and it just for an internal app that like checks that if you're a GitHub user in our org. And I put this on the screen, and it was exciting because like all the Rails developers who've never seen Elixir before, they go up and look at this controller and think, wow, I can read what this says. And that's a huge, huge advantage when you're trying to take developers who are familiar with other things and bring them into this context, this new language and paradigm. So yeah, this is super simple Phoenix controller. I think Phoenix does really well is that you don't really need to know the beam to be productive and write really good things in it. And then once you're ready to do interesting things, like it's all there to do awesome stuff. And not only that, like Elixir is just a beautiful language to write. I've made non-trivial projects in a couple languages now, and like by far Elixir is my favorite over anything else when it comes to tooling and the beauty of the language. But then on top of that, whenever it's not just a beautiful language, it's got this tank underneath when you're ready to do some interesting stuff. Elixir makes waiting on I/O cheap. So how I always introduce this is with Star Wars. I think this is why you all came. Has anyone seen Star Wars? So prequels came out when I was a kid, so those are my favorite. Apparently that's an unpopular opinion. So how I always explain this to like Rails developers who are super used to these OS level concurrency primitives with threads and processes is like these threads and processes are all like the Jedi. And like what we're introducing here is the clone troopers. It's a completely different way of thinking about your web apps. And like Jedi are great in a lot of contexts, right? Like if a Jedi needs to fight Darth Maul, which happened in the first Star Wars episode, like he can do it. He can fight this very complex enemy very effectively, right? Image processing's a lot like that, right? Like you just need to do one thing as fast as you can, and OS process is great at that. But with 6 Jedi, they can only do one thing at a time. The Jedi aren't great at concurrency. And it turns out that the web is mostly concurrency. The web is mostly like droids. They're not fighting Darth Maul. You're fighting just an army of little droids. And then I even put some WebSocket tanks in the back because those become even harder once you start to try to use OS primitives for the web. So if you watched episode 2, there's a scene that really like broke my heart because I thought the Jedi were so cool, and they just got totally beat up by a bunch of droids. This is that scene. You can see there's a dead Chrome window at the bottom. And if you think about it, like Mace Windu, this super powerful Jedi, he goes to fight this droid, and like part of fighting this droid is calling Postgres. So he just has to wait the entire time. It's Mace Windu, the most awesome, iconic character in the entire series, is just sitting in the Jedi Council room not doing anything until Postgres comes back. So that's how like I view the Ruby app servers. And then I come to Elixir, and Elixir is totally different. Elixirs are like the clone troopers, and it's a totally different paradigm to think about it. But the important thing is the clones are also bad at concurrency, right? Like any given clone can't do anything. A single Erlang process is not concurrent at all. But what they are good at is just waiting. So if a clone goes to fight a droid and has to wait on Postgres, that's fine. You still have 199,000 more of them. So that's the big difference. And then I throw Yoda, which is the big beam process, and how he has all these little beam processes on it. And I go into more stuff typically when I talk to Rails developers. I won't go into here because I think you guys are much more familiar with the Elixir than the typical crowd I get to talk to. But like supervision trees and using like clone troopers as hierarchies and getting to talk to specific people in the actor model for people that are like familiar with Node, has eventing but not like actors. But the big point I want to get across is like you get to get rid of these OS level concurrency primitives, and you get this whole new concurrency primitive, which makes what we do a lot easier. And other languages are trying to do this. There's some really cool stuff. The Python async IO and 3 is really cool. Ruby's got event machine. Everything Rust does is awesome. I don't know if you guys have read about it. And Go does its own stuff. But like the Beam is 30 years of everything they've done forever has been to support these clone trooper armies. They are the best in the world of the clone trooper armies. They know how to do this. So that's what's so exciting about using Elixir is you have this incredibly powerful thing to work with. So yeah, Elixir is this beautiful language, and that's great. That's important to like be developer productive. But really what makes it special is the beam, and the beam is good at concurrency. And it makes hard problems easy. So like a lot of times, like we really care about the user experience that we have, and like a lot of times, like building some of the more interesting user flows or handling the edge cases involves doing harder things. And in Rails, that means like a Redis mutex to make sure that only one thing in the cluster is sending you a notification. But in Elixir, you're able to do more complex and like describe situations better. And then I always like to give this part of it is the beam's not great for every problem. And like there's a lot of things to consider in technology choices, especially things just even outside of engineering. Like what does it mean for the business? Are we able to find developers? Are we able to support it? What does it look like in the long term? The beam's not great at number crunching. So if you're like trying to be as fast as you can on image processing, this is not the solution for you. It's not statically typed, but Mikkel and Eric are working on that. It's not as fast as Go for a lot of things if you're just like doing one-offs, and it's got a smaller community than other languages. Some of the tooling hasn't been as robust as we like are used to coming from Ruby. It's not object-oriented. This is always like, I think the biggest stumbling block as we bring Ruby developers into Elixir is like a lot of the things that you learned as a Ruby developer no longer apply. So my favorite book is Learn You a Haskell for Great Good. That taught me functional programming, and then it was easy to apply to Erlang, and I highly recommend it to anyone else. But now that I've learned functional programming, I would never want to go back. So what is the beam good for? It's ultra efficient I/O weight. It's widely efficient at resource pooling, and it's super highly developer available. So I kind of want to take a second to talk about a bathroom that's had a very large impact on my career and how it relates to development now. In college, I studied factory science. For you guys who came in late, in college, we'd go to a lot of the factories around town. And there were little factories, there were 2-man operations making like fake owls, and there were big factories like 1,000-man operations making car parts. But one of them really stood out, and it was this man who'd lived in East Tennessee for most of his life. And East Tennessee is the center of a bunch of trucking routes, so it's like one of the biggest trucking parts for the Cumberland Gap. So we walk into his facility, and it's huge. It's this big complex, like as big as the hotel. There's all these truck bays. We go, and all the tools are like immaculately done, and all the workers are happy, and they're doing all this work. So like we're going through the tour, and eventually we get to the front office, and we ask him like how he started. And he tells a story of like back in the day, it was a tiny operation, and there was a ton of competition because this is a super lucrative market for this semi-truck repair. And then he walks us. He tells us like these other companies, they were really focused on, making the difference to the executives. They would like wine and dine the executives. They try to get the contracts at the top levels, like try to get the incentive programs through there. And then he walked us into his waiting room for the truckers, and he showed us the bathrooms. And they were the most amazing, immaculate bathrooms I've ever seen. There were little toothpaste. He showed us the next room, and there's washer and dryers. He showed us the next room, and there's these big, comfy seats with the highest speed Wi-Fi on the wall. And what he talks about is like the secret to it all is that the truckers are choosing where they break down. So like they just happened to break down very close to his place, and then it made more sense to come to his place to get his truck repaired. And then like while they were repairing it, they did the maintenance because like while you're taking it off the road, you might as well do the maintenance. And that was his big secret to success. And that's really why I'm super excited about Elixir is it lets me build better bathrooms. The user experience that you can build on an Elixir app with things like Phoenix channels and live view just out of the box really make the difference when you're using some of these applications. And that's what makes me so excited as a former Ruby developer. So I think as we go forward, users are going to expect more and more of this real-time, real applications and like these more advanced features. And the toolkit that us at Salesloft have been using to kind of achieve that has been Elixir. So yeah, that's my talk. I'm more than happy to talk about anything else. We are the sponsors of the Elixir ATL meetup, and I have stickers of this and shiny ones if anyone is interested in those. Yeah, thank you.
Take some questions.
Yeah, for sure.
5 minutes.
Do you trouble hiring, or have you found it's not a problem?
Oh, so we're in Atlanta, so the developer community is a lot smaller, and it typically is Rails developers because there's a lot of like software as a service companies there. So pretty much 100% of who we hire for the backend are Rails developers that we train into Elixir. But we also gotta I'm a firm believer in like the engineering team, and the culture is a huge thing, and we have a really good at that. So like we got a reputation of being a really great place to work. So like developers will come seek us out. Was that the question of whether we have had trouble hiring for Elixir?
Yeah.
But yeah, we have zero requirements. Like we'll take Java developers, we'll take Go developers, we don't care. I'm a I'm very anti saying, oh, we want Ruby developers or we want this, because I think good developers are good developers. But that's a personal opinion. Anyone else?
Thank you, Grant.
Cool. Thank you.